All right, for more on this, we're now being joined by Peter Kuznick, Professor of History and Director of the Nuclear Studies Institute at American University, live from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor.
Glad to be with you.
So as you heard, the protests that we're seeing in Israel, the biggest since the war broke out, do you think these strikes will perhaps prove to be a turning point, and this will push Israel to perhaps change its strategy, accept a ceasefire deal? The fact that Hamas has said that the 6 people whose bodies were recovered from Gaza were on the hostage release deal, their names were on the list for that as well, that has only added to the growing anger and outrage. How do you assess this?
I think it's tragic. These 6 people who were killed unnecessarily add to the tens of thousands, scores of thousands of dead Palestinians who've already lost their lives in this fighting. And it's a tragedy or a war crime of immense proportions. The Netanyahu government's position is not only denounced by the Israelis, it's decried by all the humanity in the world. And yet Netanyahu looks out only for himself and his narrow vision and his personal safety and security. These demonstrations in Israel today are enormous. Hundreds of thousands of people, as many as 700,000, 300,000 in Tel Aviv alone, and strikes starting tomorrow. Can this pressure Netanyahu? Perhaps if it's so overwhelming that it looks like the Israeli parliament will finally act to overthrow him, to impeach him, and to begin to prosecute him, then maybe he will act. But left to his own devices, he has shown no interest in freeing the hostages, no interest in getting a ceasefire, no interest in negotiating a serious resolution to this horrific conflict. And the ones who have suffered the most are not the Israeli and American hostages, although they have certainly suffered more than they deserve to, but the ones who have suffered the most are the women and children in Gaza. You know, the official figure is a little over 40,000, but the British medical journal Lancet says it's up around 200,000 dead Palestinians. Well, the answer is somewhere in between, but it is unconscionable what is happening.
Right, Mr. Kuznick, as of now, we don't know the strikes in Israel, if it will gain momentum or not. We're just seeing day one of those large-scale strikes. But talk to us more about the issues that Netanyahu is facing within his cabinet right now, especially with the Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant opposing Netanyahu's stance of deploying the IDF troops at the Philadelphia corridor, which is also a point of contention during the ceasefire talks, the last round of ceasefire talks. Meanwhile, his finance minister is Bezalel Smotrich, and his national security minister, they all have threatened to topple the government if a ceasefire deal is secured. So you do speak of how Netanyahu is not interested in a ceasefire deal, but how do you assess the Israeli prime minister navigating this situation within his cabinet?
The Israeli prime minister needs to take a morally correct stance. He's been on the wrong side of morality and the wrong side of history ever since the retaliation for the horrific attack that occurred on October 7th that killed 1,200 Israelis and took another 250 hostage. But the Israeli people have had enough of this. The Israeli people certainly hate Hamas and blame Hamas for the atrocities that occurred. However, they say enough is enough, and we need to end the fighting and bring home the remaining hostages who are dying probably by the day. But there are more than 100 hostages remaining, and probably several score of them are still alive. And so, led by the hostage families, the Israeli public is standing up to Netanyahu. The estimate is that about 70% of the Israelis are opposed to what Netanyahu is doing and blame Netanyahu. So if his government does topple, we're going to likely get a more progressive government in there. You've got he's in a coalition with extreme right-wingers who are basically fascists, who are against the Palestinians, hate the Palestinians, and don't want to give any rights to the Palestinians, and are opposed to a two-state solution. But that is out of step not only with the Israeli public now, but with the international community. So the fact that the American leaders, Biden and Harris, are making this possible by providing the weapons means that they're accessories to a genocide. So they themselves are liable for war crimes prosecution. So the world sees this as a black and white issue now.
Right.
Not that the world supports Hamas and what Hamas represents, but they see what Israel is doing and that it is against the will of the Israeli people and the rest of the world population. It's a tragic situation, but something has to be done
Right.
immediately. Immediately.
Right, Professor. In fact, the United States is also slated to put forth a take-it-or-leave-it deal for Gaza ceasefire. Do you think this would perhaps be Washington's and other regional mediators' last attempt to secure a deal?
I don't think it'd be the last attempt. If Biden really wants to end this, he can say that he's temporarily cutting off all weapons supplies to Israel. That's what a lot of Americans want. That's what the younger generation wants. That's what the world community wants. And Biden and Harris are refusing to do so far. So it means that all of their crocodile tears that they shed for the hostages or for the victims in Gaza, are really meaningless because they could do something if they chose to do so. But that is not what they're saying. Even Kamala Harris, whose main foreign policy advisor, Philip Gordon, has been saying that this kind of policy is bankrupt, morally bankrupt. They're coming across as moral imbeciles right now, as reprehensible, as complicit with the Israeli right-wingers who are slaughtering the people in Gaza. And it's just heartbreaking to see.
Right, Mr. Kuznik, just a few days ago, Kamala Harris also asserted Washington's support for Israel and its right to defend itself. But thank you so much for joining us on World DNA with your insights.
Thank you.